Welcome to Campfire Horror Tales. Before the holidays arrive, winter fairs light up small towns with music, warm food, and glowing decorations. But not everything behind those lights is festive. Tonight, I'll share 6 true horror stories from winter fairs before the holidays. Real encounters that left people terrified long after the fair closed. Settle in. Winter nights hide more than you think. I used to work part-time at our town's winter fair, the one they set up every year on the empty football field behind the high school. Most people only saw the lights, the sweet smells, and the holiday music. But when you work behind the scenes, you notice the things that don't fit. The broken bulbs that somehow glow brighter than the new ones. The way the speakers crackle even when they're turned off. And the rides that seem to run a little too long after closing. But nothing bothered me as much as the old carousel at the far corner of the fairgrounds. They called it the Snow Dust Carousel because the paint was so faded it looked like it had been frosted over. The horses were carved from real wood, with eyes too lifelike and chipped smiles that never matched. My job was to help shut everything down at the end of each night, and the carousel was always last. Not because it took longer, but because the operator insisted on keeping it open until the very minute the fair officially closed. His name was Harris, and I don't remember ever seeing him do anything except stand by the control panel, staring at the horses as they went around. What bothered me early on was that Harris never dressed warm. Everyone else had thick coats, gloves, scarves. He wore a thin black jacket and no hat. It was easily 10 degrees below freezing most nights. Yet he never shivered. And whenever he talked, his breath didn't fog in the cold. I only noticed because mine did. Every word I said puffed out clouds. His, nothing. One night, near the end of my shift, I saw a little girl getting on the carousel even though the fair had closed 10 minutes earlier. The music was still playing, quiet and warped, like it was drifting through a tunnel. I walked over to tell them it was time to pack up. But Harris just lifted one finger without looking at me. It was the first time I had ever seen him move. "Last ride," he said. "Always one last ride." The girl didn't seem to notice me. She didn't even look at Harris. She chose one of the taller horses and climbed up with a blank, sleepy expression on her face. The carousel started turning before she even grabbed the pole. The lights flickered. The music slowed down until it sounded like a lullaby played backward. Something felt wrong. The cold around the carousel was sharper than anywhere else in the fair. It bit at my cheeks, stung my eyes, and settled in my bones. Like I'd just stepped into a freezer. I wanted to step back, but I couldn't. I watched the girl as she went around and around, her expression never changing. The second time she passed me, her eyes were open wider. The third time, her mouth had dropped open slightly, like she was trying to speak. The fourth time, tears streamed down her face, but she wasn't blinking. I stepped forward. "Stop the ride," I said. Harris didn't even glance at me. "She's seeing it," he whispered. I didn't know what that meant. But the next time she came around, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The horse she was riding? It wasn't carved wood anymore. Its eyes were blinking. Its mouth was moving. Its body shifted like something alive was trapped under the painted surface. And the girl was gripping the pole so tight, her knuckles were the color of bone. I lunged forward, reaching for her, but the carousel sped up suddenly. The music rose into a high, distorted whine. The lights blurred into a ring of white fire. The girl looked right at me as she passed, and her lips formed a single word. Help. I turned to Harris, furious. Shut it down. She's terrified. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I understood there was something deeply wrong with him. His eyes were pale gray, almost cloudy, and when he blinked, the sound was like frost cracking. She asked for this, he said. They all do. The last ride shows them what they carry. The carousel abruptly slowed. The music died, one note at a time. When the girl's horse came around again, she was gone. The saddle was empty. The pole she had held was covered in a thin layer of frost. I stumbled back, shaking. Where is she? Harris stepped off the platform, brushing past me. She got off, he said calmly. You just didn't see her. But there were no footprints in the snow around the ride. Only mine. I quit that night. I didn't tell anyone what I saw because I knew no one would believe me. The fair packed up the next morning, and the field behind the school was empty before noon. For a while, I convinced myself the girl must have run off. Maybe slipped behind a booth or left with her parents. Then, 2 nights later, I heard something outside my window. A faint melody, warped, slowed down, carousel music. I pulled the curtain aside, and there it was, the snow dust carousel, standing alone under the streetlight across from my house. Lights flickering, horses rocking slowly in place, frost drifting off in thin, white spirals. And sitting on one of the horses was the girl. She smiled at me this time, and the carousel began to turn. It happened 2 winters ago, on a night when the snow fell sideways and the wind cut through every layer of clothing I had. Our town's winter fair had just opened for the season, and even though the weather was awful, I decided to stop by after work. I don't know why. Maybe it was the lights or the music drifting through the storm, or maybe I just wanted to feel like the season still meant something. Either way, I ended up walking through the entrance gates with frozen eyelashes and half-numb hands. The fairground layout changes a little every year, depending on which vendors show up. But that night, there was something I had never seen before. Between 2 rows of food stalls, tucked behind a cocoa stand and a booth selling holiday ornaments, was a narrow passageway I didn't recognize. A crooked wooden sign hung over it, reading Frostbite Alley. The lettering was faded like it had been painted decades ago. The snow around the entrance was smooth, untouched, as if no one had stepped through all night. I figured it was some new attraction, maybe a themed walkway or some kind of sponsor area. The music felt quieter near it, almost muted, and the lights seemed dimmer even though they were the same bulbs used everywhere else. Curiosity won. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. The air dropped at least 20 degrees the moment I walked between the stalls. My breath turned thick and white, lingering in front of me longer than normal. The wind outside had been loud, but inside the alley, it was silent, completely still. No footsteps, no voices, no laughter, just the soft, distant hum of the fair fading behind me. I kept walking, expecting it to open back up into the main fairgrounds. But the alley stretched on much farther than it should have. The stalls on either side were different too, not like the cheerful holiday ones outside. These were older, wooden panels warped by age, windows frosted from the inside, strings of lights flickering weakly like they weren't getting enough power. One stall had a cracked mannequin wearing a winter coat that looked hand-sewn. Another had a display of gloves arranged neatly, all facing the same direction. About halfway down, I heard something behind me. A soft scrape, like a shoe dragging across icy ground. When I turned around, the entrance wasn't there anymore. The passage behind me was swallowed by fog, thick and swirling, even though there was no wind to move it. My stomach tightened. I wasn't lost. This place simply wasn't right. I took a few more steps, my heartbeat picking up speed. That's when I saw him. A child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in the middle of the alley. He wore a puffy winter jacket and a blue hat with a pom-pom, but his face, something was wrong with his face. His skin was pale, too pale, and frost clung to his eyelashes. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring at me like he had been waiting for someone. I forced myself to speak. "Hey, are you okay? Are your parents here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he raised one trembling hand and pointed farther down the alley. His fingers shook like it weighed too much to hold up. I swallowed hard, trying not to let fear make me sound harsh. "Do you want me to help you?" Again, no answer. Just that same frozen stare. The scrape came again, this time from somewhere farther ahead. Something in the fog shifted. The lights flickered. A shape moved between the stalls, slow and uneven, footsteps crunching softly in the snow. I couldn't make out what it was, only that it was tall. Taller than any person had the right to be. And it was moving toward us. The boy finally blinked. One slow, unnatural blink. Then he whispered something so soft, I almost didn't catch it. "Don't let it find you." I grabbed his arm gently, trying to guide him back with me, but he pulled away, shaking his head. His lips turned blue as he whispered again. "It's already here." The shape in the fog stepped closer. I saw the outline, a long, distorted figure, limbs slightly bent as though they were frozen mid-motion. When the lights flickered again, its shadow stretched across the alley, reaching toward us like fingers. I panicked. Survival took over. I turned and ran, expecting the fog to block my way. But the alley suddenly shifted. The wooden signs reappeared, the lights brightened, and the cold eased just enough for me to breathe again. I didn't look back. I sprinted until the music of the fair burst through the silence like a lifeline. When I finally reached the main walkway, everything was normal. People eating funnel cakes, kids laughing, vendors shouting out deals. But when I looked behind me, Frostbite Alley was gone. The cocoa stand and the ornament booth were still there. But the space between them was now just a narrow gap filled with snow. I went back the next day, trying to convince myself I had imagined everything. The workers said there was never an attraction called Frostbite Alley. They said no one had disappeared, no child had gone missing, and no new stalls had been added that night. I almost believed them, until last week. I was walking home from work when I heard something behind me, a soft scrape on icy ground. I turned around and saw a small figure standing under the streetlight across the road. A child, wearing a blue hat with a pom-pom. Frost clinging to his eyelashes, his arm raised, pointing toward something behind me. And the air suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. My friends never believed me when I told them about the vendor who never breathed. But every winter when the fair returns to our town, I find myself scanning the rows of stalls, hoping he isn't there. And yet, he always is. Same spot, same booth, same faded blue awning, fluttering even when there's no wind. The fair changes constantly, new rides, new smells, new decorations. But he stays exactly the same, as if everything else moves around him. The first time I saw him was 3 years ago. It was one of those nights where the cold sinks into your clothes before you even reach the gate. I walked alone, just killing time before meeting friends. The holiday music echoed unevenly across the fairground, like the speakers were freezing from the inside. When I passed his booth, something pulled my attention like a hook catching fabric. He was standing behind a wooden counter, surrounded by small glass jars filled with a soft orange glow. The jars looked warm, literally warm, like light bulbs covered in frost. And the sign above them read, "Borrow a little warmth." It seemed like a gimmick, some winter-themed novelty, until I noticed what made me stop. He didn't exhale. At all. Everyone else around us had thick puffs of mist leaving their mouths with every word, every breath. But he stood still, bare-handed in the freezing air, and nothing, no fog, no warmth, left his lips. His skin looked pale and tight, like someone had sculpted him out of packed snow. But his eyes were the worst. They were too sharp, too focused, watching every passerby with the patience of someone who already knows the ending. "Cold night," he said when I got too close. His voice was perfectly smooth, but it didn't echo like the others. It simply existed, crisp and thin, as if the cold swallowed half of it before it reached my ears. "What's in the jars?" I asked. My voice shook a little. I tried to hide it. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, more like the practiced smile of someone who knows exactly what you need. "Warmth," he said. "Borrowed warmth. For people who can't seem to hold onto their own." He picked up one of the jars and placed it on the counter. When his fingers touched the glass, frost spread across the surface instead of melting. A single spark of borrowed comfort, enough to chase off cold thoughts. enough to make the season feel like it used to. The jar pulsed gently in time with my heartbeat. I swear it did. And for a moment, I could feel heat radiating from it, warm enough to thaw the numbness in my fingertips. Something deep inside me wanted it, needed it. "How much?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "There's no price. You borrow it. You pay later." I should have walked away. No good story ever starts with someone agreeing to vague terms from a stranger who doesn't breathe. But the cold that year felt heavier, darker, harder to shake. And that jar felt like a promise. So I reached out and touched it. The warmth spread through me instantly. Not like stepping into a heated building, but like remembering a moment of comfort you'd forgotten existed. My lungs felt lighter. My chest loosened. I didn't feel so afraid of the long walk home. For the first time in weeks, the world didn't seem so heavy. He watched me with that same patient expression. "Enjoy it," he said softly. "But don't keep it longer than you should." I left the fair soon after, the jar glowing faintly in my coat pocket. That night, I slept better than I had in years. My dreams were calm, warm, bright. But when I woke up, I realized something strange. I couldn't remember the dream. Not a single image. Not even the feeling. Something was missing in my mind, like a page torn from a journal. I shrugged it off. One dream wasn't a big deal. But over the next week, small pieces of memory began slipping away. Nothing huge at first. What I had for lunch, a conversation with a coworker, the title of a movie I'd watched. Then it became bigger. I forgot a friend's birthday. I forgot the words to songs I'd known since childhood. And each day, the jar glowed a little brighter, as if feeding on the spaces in my mind. By the end of the week, the jar went dim, completely dark, and suddenly, the cold I had been trying to escape surged back all at once. Worse than before, empty in a way heat couldn't touch. I rushed to the fair, hoping, foolishly, that I could give the jar back. He was there, waiting. I kept it too long. I said, breath shaking, "Take it back. I don't want it." He smiled that same practiced smile. "You already paid," he said quietly. "Warmth always has a cost." I set the jar on the counter, but it slipped through his fingers as if the glass weren't solid. It fell to the ground and shattered. Light burst from it, bright, blinding, and for a moment I felt a rush of heat, and then it was gone, every last bit. I stumbled back, cold tearing through me like a blade. "What did I lose?" I whispered. "What did you take?" He leaned closer, his breathless voice curling through the air like frost forming. "Names," he said. "Moments. Pieces. Enough to match the warmth you borrowed." I tried to speak, but I couldn't remember the answer to his next question. "Do you remember your name?" He wasn't mocking me. He was waiting. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. And that's why every winter I search the fairgrounds, praying he's gone. Not because I want to confront him, not because I want revenge, but because every time I hear the music and see the lights, a single thought fills the empty space where my name used to be. Don't borrow warmth you can't return. My grandfather once told me something he never admitted to anyone else, not even my grandmother. He waited until I was old enough to understand, as he put it. Old enough to know that not every winter memory is meant to be cozy or sweet. He told me this while we were sitting by the fire one late November evening. The kind where frost gathers on the windows faster than the wood can burn it away. He said he needed someone in the family to know the truth, so it wouldn't die with him. When he was young, the winter market used to be much bigger than it is now. He said it stretched across almost half the town square back then. Lanterns, music, vendors, rides, the whole thing glowing like a frozen carnival. The strange part wasn't how large it was, but how it changed after sundown. Lights that weren't there in the daytime suddenly appeared at night. New pathways opened between the booths. And sometimes, the layout didn't match what it had been the night before. My grandfather worked there one winter, helping set up decorations and clean the walkways. He was 17 when it happened. The night he swore he saw the market change shape on its own. It started as a normal shift. He swept snow away from the main walkway and helped carry crates of supplies. Around 10 o'clock, most families had left, and the music grew softer. The air took on that heavy cold, the kind that sinks into your lungs and makes you feel like you swallowed ice. His supervisor told him to check the back rows for trash before heading home. But when he walked behind the ornament booth near the center of the market, he found a path he didn't recognize. It wasn't unusual for the market to add new stalls, but this one felt wrong. The lights hanging above it flickered with a dark red hue, dimmer than the warm white bulbs used everywhere else. The snow on the path looked untouched, smooth as glass, even though the market had been open for hours. He should have turned back. He told me that more than once. But at 17, curiosity seems harmless. Besides, he said, it didn't feel dangerous at first, just different. The farther he walked, the quieter everything became. The music faded behind him until it sounded muffled, then distant, then gone. The booths lining the new path didn't match the cheerful ones in the main area. No garlands, no lights, no handcrafted gifts. They were old wooden stalls with their shutters nailed shut from the inside, as if whatever was in them wasn't meant to be seen. Eventually, he reached a crossroads. 4 branching paths stretched out, each one darker than the last. The snow was deeper here, untouched and soft, as though no one had walked through for years. My grandfather called out, expecting another worker to answer. But only the wind responded, whispering along the wooden beams. Then he heard footsteps, slow, dragging, uneven, coming from the path on his left. He froze. The footsteps stopped. He took 1 step back. The footsteps took 1 step forward. My grandfather wasn't a jumpy man. but he said that moment chilled him more than any winter night ever had. The air felt dense, like the world was holding its breath. He waited, listening. The footsteps started again, moving closer, but still hidden in the darkness. Something was coming. He didn't stay to find out what. He turned and ran back the way he came, snow crunching under his boots. But the path behind him seemed longer than before. The stalls looked different, leaning forward, almost closing in on him. When he reached the first turn, he realized it wasn't just the path stretching. The entire market was shifting. The lights flickered violently. The wooden beams shuddered, creaking like old trees bending in the wind. Booths shifted positions, sliding silently across the snow. Pathways twisted like they were alive, rearranging themselves with every step he took. He described it like a maze that rebuilt itself while you ran through it. By the time he finally broke into the main walkway again, he fell to his knees. The music returned. The warm lights glowed. People were still smiling, eating, shopping, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding just yards away. My grandfather stood up, brushed off the snow, and forced himself to walk home as if nothing had happened. He never returned to the winter market after that night. Years later, when he told me this story, he said something I still think about whenever the holidays start. The market wasn't built on the square, he said quietly. The square was built around the market. That place was here long before we were. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. But he didn't smile. Over the last 2 decades, the winter market's gotten smaller. Fewer vendors, shorter hours. People complain it's not as magical as it used to be. But every year, without fail, 1 or 2 people go missing during opening weekend. Accidents, the town says, lost in the crowd. And every year a few families swear they saw extra lights behind the stalls, or heard someone calling from a path that wasn't supposed to be there. My grandfather passed away last spring. When we cleaned out his workshop, I found a wooden map of the old winter market carved into the back of his workbench. Several pathways were scratched out. A few were circled. And at the bottom, in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "If a path wasn't there in the morning, don't follow it at night." My sister told me this story when she was 17, and she never repeated it after that. Even years later, when we were adults, she'd freeze up the moment I mentioned that winter. She said some things stay cold for a reason. It happened during the winter festival the year she turned 12. The fairground sat beside a frozen lake decorated with lights that reflected beautifully off the ice. Families loved taking pictures there. But my sister always felt uneasy near that lake. She said the ice looked too dark in certain places, as if something beneath it was watching. While our parents bought cocoa, she wandered toward the water. The fair was loud, full of music and laughter. She stood at the edge, looking at her reflection, except it wasn't hers. The face staring up from under the ice was younger, smaller, different. My sister leaned closer, thinking the ice was just distorting her image. But the face didn't mimic her movements. Its eyes stayed fixed on her, wide, unblinking. Then fingers pressed against the underside of the ice. Small hands, frost creeping around them, slow tapping. Tap, tap, tap. At first, she thought the girl was trapped. She yelled for a nearby vendor, but no one heard her over the noise. When she turned back, the girl's face was closer to the surface. Too close, like she was rising through the ice itself. My sister took a step back. The girl smiled. Not a warm smile, a slow, strange one that cracked at the edges like a frozen mask trying to bend. Then the tapping grew rapid. Tap, 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 echoing through the ice. The ground beneath my sister groaned. She ran. She didn't look back. She tore through the fair until she reached our parents. When they asked what happened, she lied and said she slipped. She didn't tell the truth for 5 years. That night, she woke to a familiar sound. She opened her curtains, expecting a branch or melting ice. But the street outside was silent. No trees close enough to touch the glass. The tapping stopped only when she leaned closer, just in time to see frost forming on the inside of the window. Perfect handprints. Small ones. Pressed from inside. For years she heard tapping whenever winter came. Soft, distant, like it traveled through frozen ground. Always around the time the winter fair returned. She tried to ignore it, but every season it grew slightly louder, like whoever was tapping was getting closer. She finally told me everything when she was 24. She said she felt someone following her, though she never saw anyone. She said the tapping had started to echo wherever she went, through storm drains, frozen puddles, even metal railings on cold mornings. She said the girl wasn't trying to escape that night. She was trying to trade places. 2 years later, my sister disappeared. No signs, no tracks, nothing. The police assumed she wandered off during a hike, maybe slipped somewhere. But I remembered what she told me. I remembered the frost on her window. I remembered the tapping. Last night, I walked past a frozen drainage ditch near my street. Snow had sealed the top, turning it into a smooth circle. Out of habit, I glanced down. A face stared up at me. Small, pale, eyes wide open, and smiling. Then came the tapping, soft at first, then clearer, exactly the way she described it. And when I leaned in closer, I saw something else. Another face behind the first one. My sister, pressed against the ice, watching me from below. My uncle used to warn us about winter fairs, and not in the normal, don't get lost way. He said it like someone who survived something he couldn't explain. He never liked holiday lights afterward. Even small decorations made him uneasy. When we asked why, he'd simply say, "Some lights aren't just lights." He didn't tell the full story until I was 16. We were in his garage while he worked on an old snowblower. He suddenly stopped, sat on the workbench, and said, "You know those bright ornaments near the back of the winter fair? The ones that glow too much? They're not ornaments. I saw what they really are. He said it happened when he was 19, during a winter fair that stretched all the way into the woods. He and his friends were wandering near the tree line, where the music faded and the lights grew sparse. That's when one of them noticed something floating between the branches. Lights. Cold, pale orbs drifting in smooth lines, too steady to be lanterns or decorations. They didn't flicker or sway. They glided, almost studying the area. His friends joked about it, assuming it was some holiday display. But my uncle felt something wrong in the air, a static pressure that made him grit his teeth. One of the guys, Mark, walked toward the trees. He waved at the orbs, laughing. My uncle kept calling him back, but Mark brushed him off. As he got closer, the orbs stopped moving, all at once. They hovered silently like they were waiting. When Mark stepped right beneath them, 3 lights drifted down, surrounding him in a loose triangle. He reached up. "Probably sensors," he said. He touched one. There was a burst of pale light, silent, quick, and when it faded, Mark was gone. Completely. No scream, no footprints, just a dark print in the snow. The group panicked. The orbs pulled back at first, then dozens more appeared from deeper in the trees, drifting forward like a slow, deliberate tide. They weren't chasing. They were choosing. My uncle grabbed one of the others, ran toward the fair. The lights followed, weaving through the branches and stalls with unnatural precision. The music from the fair drowned their shouts, and people didn't seem to notice anything strange. But in every reflective surface they passed, mirrors, metal trays, the back of a spoon. The lights appeared, inches behind them. My uncle realized they could only be seen properly through reflections. They reached the carousel, and its mirrored panels reflected the orbs from every angle. The lights froze at the edge of the ride, pulsing softly, as if confused by their own multiplied images. After a few seconds, they drifted backward, retreating into the trees until they disappeared altogether. My uncle left town the next morning. He didn't go to another winter fair for years. Even after he came back, he never walked near the forest side of town again. The missing person report for Mark stayed open, but everyone assumed he had run away. My uncle knew better. He just couldn't prove anything. When he finished telling me the story, he handed me an old photo taken at the fair the night Mark vanished. In the background, near the trees, 3 pale lights hovered in the dark, faint but undeniable. He tapped the corner of the picture and said, "They pick someone every season. The winter fair opens tomorrow." I walked past the entrance tonight, and the workers were already testing the lights. Everything looked normal. Cheerful music, warm bulbs, families taking photos. But as I passed a parked car, the cold air fogging around me, I glanced at the reflection in its window. 3 pale orbs hovered behind me, drifting, watching, choosing.